Welcome to Oxyrhynchos, a bustling city of Hellenistic Egypt, famous for its papyri and, as we shall see, infamous for its drama. In this video here, we delve into a unique legal case preserved for over 2 millennia. It's the tale of Thamunis, a woman whose relaxing spa day in early February 221 BCE turned into a spa day in hell. Thamunis writes to the king, recounting how her visit to the baths spiraled into conflict, complete with a xenophobic antagonist and a judge she accuses of bias. Through her letter, we glimpse a world far removed yet deeply human. Documentary sources like this are vital to understanding everyday lives in Antiquity. Without them, Thamunis' struggles and her appeal for justice would be lost to history. Did she win her case? We'll never know. What we have is her voice demanding to be heard. Thamunis hailed from Heraclea Magna, or Heracleopolis, a city in the middle of Egypt. Her journey to Oxyrhynchos, located in the Asinoid Nomos, was no small feat. In both Pharaonic and Hellenistic Egypt, the nomoi were administrative districts akin to provinces, each governed by local officials and serving as the backbone of the state's bureaucratic system. Under the Hellenistic rulers, the Ptolemies, the Egyptian nomoi were fundamental to maintaining control over the country's vast and diverse population, blending Greek administrative structures with the deeply rooted traditions of pharaonic governance. The Asinoid Nomos was known for its agricultural wealth. It bordered the oasis of Fayum with its fertile canals and fields, the region that would become the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. To reach the town of Oxyrhynchos, Thamunis would have needed at least 2 days of travel, likely more given the challenges of the road. This was no ordinary destination. Oxyrhynchos, renowned centuries later as the site where the British papyrologists Grenfell and Hunt unearthed hundreds of thousands of papyrus fragments, was a thriving hub of life and history. I've covered this discovery in another video for those curious. Oxyrhynchos, the name itself carried a clue to its nature. In Greek, many place names are plural. Athens was Athenae. Delphi was Delphoi, not just marking a location, but a community of people who lived there. So when Thamunis set out for Oxyrhynchos, it wasn't just a town she was heading to, but a dynamic community, a gathering of souls with their own concerns and quirks. Among them, however, she would soon encounter more than her share of difficulties. Let's assume that Thamunis traveled by oxen cart, a slow means of transport. Over uneven and sandy roads along the riverbanks of the Nile, the journey stretched for nearly 17 hours without rest. Likely, her cart became bogged down in the roads at times, forcing her to disembark, push, or walk alongside it. The scorching sun and dusty winds would have left her dirty, muddy, and exhausted. But perhaps she actually traveled by boat. We do not know this. A river passage on the Nile might have been a bit more comfortable, but certainly not much faster. What brought her to Oxyrhynchos? Trade, perhaps? Visiting someone? A leisure trip? Well, holidays as we know them weren't really common in those days. The papyrus mentions the term epixenothine, to sojourn temporarily, suggesting that her stay was intended to be a brief one. And indeed, traveling by boat would have been faster. Fortunately for us today, we have access to a very useful tool, Orbis, the Stanford geospatial network model of the Roman world. This online resource provides precisely the kind of information that Thamunis would have needed to calculate herself or gather from friends back in Heracleopolis. While Orbis focuses on the Roman world slightly later in time, We can reasonably assume that the principles of travel and transport had not changed drastically in the 200 years between Thamunis' journey and the beginning of the Roman period in Egypt. For those curious about the logistics of ancient travel, I highly recommend exploring the Orbis website. I will include a link in this video description for you to try it out. We, however, have decided that Thamunis traveled on the sandy roads along the Nile, and our imagined Thamunis was a woman who valued cleanliness and refinement. She had packed fresh, clean clothes for her trip, longing for the moment she could change into them after bathing, and she also wanted to wear her precious stone necklace. When she finally reached Oxyrhynchos under the blazing afternoon light, all she longed for was the comfort of a bath to wash away the dirt and exhaustion of her journey. On the market square of Oxyrhynchos, Thamunis would have inquired about the nearest bathhouse. Did she ask in Greek, the language of administration and the elites, or in Egyptian, her native tongue? Her name and a telling detail from her petition, but more about this later, confirm her Egyptian origins. Communication wouldn't have been an issue. Oxyrhynchos was just 75 kilometers from her hometown, and its residents would have shared a similar linguistic and cultural backdrop. Someone finally points her towards the bathhouse relief at last. A chance to wash away the dust of the journey and step into the warm water, or so it seemed. What exactly sparked the clash between Thamunis and a certain Tortais, a local woman from Oxyrhynchos, in the humid echoing chambers of this Egyptian bathhouse in February 221 BCE? According to Thamunis, it was a case of xenophobia. Tortais attacked her simply because she was a stranger. But with only Thamunis' side of the story, we are left to imagine the rest. We have no surviving documentary sources that present Tortais' version of events, so we must rely entirely on Thamunis' account. Whether exaggerated or not, her complaint is the only voice preserved in this ancient dispute. Or should we assume that our Thamunis was a liar? Nah, certainly not. Here in our video, we'll be unapologetically partial. Team Thamunis all the way. Perhaps Thamunis, eager for relief, claimed Tortais' preferred spot in the bathing tub. Or maybe Thamunis, flustered and still dusty from her journey, accidentally splashed water onto Tortais' freshly oiled hair, setting off a fiery exchange worthy of a scene from a Menandrian play. Or, worse, could it be that our Thamunis, overcome with excitement at finally reaching the baths, jumped in with a resounding cannonball splash, thoroughly drenching all her fellow bathers and offending Tortais' sense of decorum? We may imagine that what began as a few sharp words quickly escalated. Tortais called Thamunis a mud-footed peasant and a jackal who can't tell clean water from a ditch, while Thamunis fired back with accusations of her rival being a fish-brained frog-catcher. Of course, we have no witnesses, and we don't really know what Egyptian insults sounded like, but we can imagine. And if we do imagine, we must include a devastating blow, the ultimate Egyptian insult Tortais shouted at Thamunis. You smell of fish. This now is an insult we know from the ancient sources. In the steamy chambers of the bathhouse, such a slur must have landed like a slap in the face, escalating the fight to pushing, slapping, and eventually an all-out brawl. By the end, Tortais delivered a sound beating, leaving Thamunis bruised, humiliated, and more determined than ever to seek justice. The bathhouse was in shambles after their fight, but Thamunis had endured enough. Determined to seek justice, she grabbed Tototais and marched straight to the village judge or village headman, the Commarches, ready to demand accountability for what she had suffered. Adding to the drama, Thamunis accused Tototais of snatching one of her prized possessions, a precious stone necklace she had carefully packed for the trip. The bathhouse, meant to offer tranquility and refreshment, had become the stage for a heated conflict. But what happened next? Peetosiris, the Commarches, the village headman, turned out to be Tototais' cousin's neighbor's barber's best friend. Thamunis couldn't help but feel that everyone in Oxyrhynchos was just a little too closely related to each other, leaving her wondering if she could ever get a fair trial. To add insult to injury, Peetosiris turned out to be blatantly xenophobic, or so Thamunis claimed. If he had lived in our days, he'd have styled his hair dramatically and led a populist campaign against foreigners, for sure. Thamunis, already feeling unwelcome, now faced a judge whose bias was as obvious as the annual Nile flood. Peetosiris totally dismissed Thamunis' complaints, sided with Tototais. The papyrus says that she could speak freely all the time, while presumably Thamunis had to shut up. And then Peetosiris had our Thamunis thrown into a prison cell for 4 horrible days. She eventually secured her freedom only through bribery, handing over a stunning dress worth 30 drachmas to Peetosiris. The dress, once her finest, with fabric flowing like the waves of the Nile, was promptly gifted to that plotting jackal Tototais. Not long after, Thamunis saw her parading through the streets of Oxyrhynchos draped in her treasured dress and arrogantly flaunting the stone necklace she had brazenly stolen. Proof, in Thamunis' words, of Tototais' mud-hearted, crocodile-brained shamelessness. That was it. Enough was enough. A spa day in hell, and Thamunis wanted nothing more than to return to Herakleopolis. If ancient Egypt had anything like Yelp, the bathhouse in Oxyrhynchos would have been hit with the worst review of all times. No star, no mercy. Fighting locals, biased judges, and stolen necklaces would not recommend it. Space and 2 exclamation marks. Thamunis was a boomer. After furiously composing her review of the spa, Thamunis still didn't feel appeased. Her rage simmered on, so she decided to escalate matters. Justice, she thought, could only come from the very top. Naturally, she addressed her letter to the king himself, Ptolemy IV, who had just ascended the throne after the death of his father Ptolemy III, literally almost on the exact day that Thamunis had her unfortunate bathing adventure in Oxyrhynchos. Curiously, though, her impassionate plea to the king ranted at length about the stolen necklace, but didn't explicitly demand justice for it. Odd, isn't it? Could there be more to Thamunis' story than she's letting us on? Something about her account seems a little suspicious. Here we see the papyrus. Like all papyri, its modern designation begins with the letter P for papyrus. Thamunis' story is recorded on P. Entoix 83. Typically, papyri are abbreviated with the name of the archive or the city where they are stored. For instance, P. Oxy for the Oxyrhynchos collection in Oxford, P. Leyden for those in Leyden, or P. Windop for the papyri held in Vienna, ancient Vindobona. P. Entoix, however, is a bit different. The abbreviation doesn't refer to a storage location, but to a category of text called entoixes. formal petitions or requests submitted to the authorities. These documents offer insights into the lives, disputes, and grievances of ordinary people in antiquity, preserved as part of bureaucratic or legal records. Here we see the Greek text, and the edition shows that 3 scribal hands contributed to the entire text. In papyrology, hands refer to the distinctly different styles of writing, identifying different individuals who worked on a document. Whether Thamunis herself wrote the main text or hired a scribe is unclear, but once the text reached the chancery in Alexandria, it was forwarded to the responsible authorities, not quite in the way Thamunis had hoped, but more on this shortly. What in generally stands out is that Thamunis initiated the legal procedure herself. The Greek concept of guardianship didn't apply for Egyptians, allowing her to act independently, something a Hellenistic Greek woman, say from Alexandria, in the very same time could not have done. Let's have a look at the translation. Thamunis greets the king and introduces herself, stating that she belongs to the nomos of Heraclea Magna or Heracleopolis. She names the accused. She was wronged by Tototais, an inhabitant of Oxyrhynchos in the Arsinoid nomos. Then she gives her version of the story that we already know. When I was visiting Oxyrhynchos and had gone into the baths, the accused, appearing on the scene and grabbing hold of me as I was bathing in a tub in the women's room, cast me out of the tub. When I did not give way, she, disdaining me because I was a stranger, struck me a great deal on whatever part of my body she might hit, and took away from me my stone necklace. After this, when I called for help to Petosiris the Comarches, the village headman, about these matters, Tototais, after being summoned, addressed him when she chose. So Tototais was allowed to speak, and Thamunis probably wasn't, and the Comarches, plotting with Tototais, led me off to the Phylake, the prison, and held me there for 4 days, before he stripped me of the dress which I was wearing, worth 30 drachmas, and which the accused now has. Thus was I released. Thamunis proceeds to outline for the king what, in her view, his course of action should be. I ask you then, king, that you command Diophanes, the strategos, to write to Motion, the epistates, to send Tototais to him, and, if Motion judges these things to be true, to force Tototais to give back the dress to Thamunis, the one worth 30 drachmas, and that the king commands Diophanes, that is the strategos, to pronounce judgment concerning the things that were done to Thamunis, so that through the king's agency she may find justice. In Hellenistic Egypt, the strategos was an official responsible for maintaining public order and overseeing judicial matters within the nomoi. Directly accountable to the king, the strategos played a crucial role in ensuring the smooth functioning of the legal system. This included managing the coexistence of the parallel Hellenistic Greek and Egyptian legal traditions, reflecting the diverse nature of Hellenistic Egyptian society. The term epistates was used for officials across various domains, which sometimes created interpretative challenges in identifying a specific type of official. We may translate the term as superintendent, and the title appears in surviving documents as district chief. The epistates acted, for example, as a substitute for the strategos in nomoi that did not have their own strategos. In any case, Diophanes sent the letter back closer to Thamunis' home, to Motion, the superintendent. Under Thamunis' letter, the strategos, or someone in his office, had written, "To Motion, by all means reconcile them, but if you are unable, send them so they may be judged before the Laokritai." Astonishingly, just 11 days after the bathhouse brawl, Thamunis' letter journeyed through Alexandria's bureaucracy, was processed, forwarded to Magdala in the Fayoum, where centuries later the very papyrus was discovered, so far quicker than today's paperwork. Indeed, a third scribal hand had added the date when the letter left Alexandria once more on the backside of the papyrus and had labeled the petition Thamunis against Tototais concerning address. And this, essentially, is where our story ends. We might speculate that Thamunis filed another petition to the king, this time targeting the biased and xenophobic village headman Petosiris. Did that man truly believe his behavior would escape notice? And also, we spot a small misunderstanding in Thamunis' perception of the law. She seemed to expect her complaint against Tototais to be resolved in the Greek Hellenistic court of her nomos. Perhaps after her encounter with Petosiris, she had lost hope in the Egyptian law courts. However, the chancery in Alexandria saw things differently, redirecting the case in a way that aligned more closely with Hellenistic Egypt's bureaucratic and legal norms. If Motion failed to reconcile Thamunis and Tototais, their case would proceed to the Laogritai, the court designated for Egyptians, referred to as Laoi, literally the people, distinguishing Egyptians from the Greek population. Interestingly, the decision by the Strategos reveals that Tototais' actions didn't invoke state prosecution. Unlike today, where similar behavior might fall under criminal law, the incident was treated purely as a private dispute, a matter to be resolved between individuals without necessary state intervention. Documentary sources like this papyrus offer a rare glimpse into everyday life in Hellenistic Egypt, revealing not just administrative structures but deeply personal stories. Through Thamunis' complaint, we see a complex legal system, human conflict, and timeless frustrations, all brought to life by the survival of one single ancient document.